Hello students, today's topic is climate, geography chapter number 4. When we talk about climate, there are two terms among which we get confused, that is weather and climate. These two terms, although they carry the same factors or the same elements, but they are measured at different period of time. When we talk about weather, it is a state of atmosphere at any point of time and space, and it keeps on changing every time. Like for example, right now, the condition of the atmosphere around you will be termed as the weather of the area at that point of time and in that area. So weather is the atmospheric condition at any point of time and space. Whereas when we talk about climate, it refers to the sum total of weather conditions and variations over a large area and for a long period of time. That is, a lot of weather conditions which are prevailing at one place for a very long time. We study that weather condition and then we take out an average which tells us what is the climate of that region. The time that we take to calculate climate of any area can be as long as 30 years because the weather conditions of any area may change day to day, but they are going to give you an average atmospheric condition after a very long period of time, and the period of time which is calculated to find out the climate of any area is around 30 years. When we calculate weather and climate of any region, there are certain elements of the atmospheric condition which we study. These elements include temperature, pressure, that is air pressure, wind, humidity, and precipitation. When we study these elements and go through examination of all these elements, then we can find out the weather condition of any particular area, and according to the weather condition we can find out what type of climate is that area in. Now, to study the climate of any area, there are certain factors which affect the climate of any particular area. To start with, the first factor which affects the climate of an area is latitude. Latitudes are horizontal lines which run parallel to each other around the earth. When we talk about latitudes, because of the curvature of the earth, we see that the latitudes which are closer to the equator receive more of sunlight. As we move away from the equator, that is on higher latitudes, we find that the temperature starts dropping because the sunlight which reach in these areas is very much inclined, and because of the inclination of the sun rays, they do not get so much of heat. So if an area is located on a higher latitude, we find that that area is comparatively colder than the areas which are closer to the equator. We can relate this example with the location of India as well, that India is located on the tropical and subtropical zone, that is the area between the two tropics, which is the tropical zone, and most of the southern part of the country is included in the tropical zone, and the northern part of the country, that is over the Tropic of Cancer, we find that the country faces the subtropical type of climate. The second factor which affects the climate of any place can be altitude, that is height. The altitude on which any area is located will no doubt affect the climate of the area, because as we go higher in altitude, the temperature starts dropping, and there is a reason. The reason behind the drop in the temperature as we go on higher altitude is because we are moving upward, away from the atmospheric blanket which is covering us. That is, the amount of air above us is decreasing. Because the amount of air molecule above us is decreasing, the content of capturing the heat of the sun rays is also decreasing. So as we move higher in the altitude, the temperature starts dropping. We cannot relate the air pressure with the drop of air pressure with the altitude, but when we study it, it is supposed to be constant. We won't decrease the air pressure here with the drop of temperature. So as we move upward in the altitude, the temperature drops. The next factor which affects the climate of any area is pressure and wind system. There is a relationship between the pressure and temperature. As we move on higher temperature, the pressure starts dropping. And as we move on low temperature areas, the pressure is increasing in these areas. This is so because as the temperature increases, the air near the surface gets heated up and it rises up. As the column of the air near the surface decreases in amount, it creates a low pressure area in the surroundings. Whereas when we talk about areas which have low temperature, the air tends to contract and the molecules tend to get closer to each other, which increases the air pressure in that area. And the pressure and temperature relationship also affects the movement of the wind, because the wind always moves from high pressure areas to low pressure areas. Because every part of the earth do not get equal sunlight, the temperature varies around the globe, and because of the variation in the temperature, the pressure is also variable around the globe, and this variant pressure affects the movement of the wind. If it was not so, if there was a constant temperature everywhere around the world, then the wind movement that we witness might not have been possible. So wind moves from high pressure to low pressure areas. Another factor which affects the climate of any area is distance from the sea. The areas which are closer to the sea gets a moderate type of climate because of the constant blowing of land breeze and sea breeze. Land breeze and sea breeze are winds which blow in night and daytime respectively because of the change in temperature and pressure in the close by areas. In the daytime, the temperature in land areas is high, whereas the temperature in the water or the sea is comparatively low. Because of this, the pressure is low in the land area and the pressure is high in the sea area. So we witness a wind movement from high pressure to low pressure, which is known as sea breeze because it is flowing from sea. In the night time, the land gets cold comparatively faster to the sea, whereas sea, because of the effect of the water, contains some amount of heat within it. So the temperature in the water is comparatively higher than the land, which affects the pressure and finally the wind movement. Because here in the night time the breeze is flowing from land to sea, it is termed as land breeze. Because of the constant flow of sea breeze and land breeze in the coastal areas or in the close by areas to the sea, the temperature gets moderated automatically if there is a cold breeze and it is substituted by a warm wind coming from the sea or from the land, depending on what time of the day it is. So the areas which are closer to the coast, they get a moderate type of climate. As you start moving away from the coastal areas into the interiors of the continent, the temperature starts getting extreme. The next factor which affects the climate of any area is relief features. Relief features like mountains, plains, plateaus which occur in the way also affect the climate of the area. Suppose there is a plain area, then there will be no barrier for the wind to stop and help in precipitation. Whereas if there is an area which is covered by mountain, will act as a barrier and help into rainfall. If now then again if we are talking about mountains as barrier, it will depend on what side the place is located at. If the place is located at the windward side of the mountain, then the place will receive most amount of the precipitation, whereas if the place is located on the leeward side of the mountain, no rainfall or very less rainfall will be witnessed by that area. And the final factor which affects the climate of the area is ocean currents. Ocean currents along with the onshore winds affect the climate of any area. If the ocean current is blowing from equator to the poles, it will carry warmth with it. Whereas if the current is blowing from poles towards the equator, then it will most probably carry cold temperature with it, and it will affect the area of the coast which are coming in its way. So ocean currents also affect the climate of any area. So these six were the major factors which affect the climate of any area. Now moving on to the factors which affect the climate of India in particular that we are going to study in this chapter. The factors which affect the temperature variation, the factors which lead to the advent of the monsoon wind into the country, and how the monsoon winds enter and then spread their effect into the whole country and monsoon is witnessed, and then finally the retreat of the monsoon and the effect of the whole climatic condition onto the whole country. Now coming to the factors which affect India's climate. The first, like we studied in the earlier topic, latitude. The location of the country affects the climate. India is located on the Tropic of Cancer. The Tropic of Cancer divides the country into almost two equal halves. The southern part of the country is a part of the tropical type of climate because it is coming in between the two tropics, and the northern part of the country is coming into the subtropical type of climate. So both these type of climates aren't extreme, and they bring to a moderating effect to the climate of the country. Altitude. The biggest altitude which affects the climate of the country is Himalayas, which acts as a barrier, a protector for the country. If it was not for the Himalayas, the country might not have been in the same condition that we witness today. The Himalayas act dually for the country. First, the Himalayas stop the cold Siberian winds from entering into the country in the months of December and January. If it was so, if Himalayas were not there, the country would have been a cold desert because the cold winds coming from the northern pole would have taken over the whole area and turned it into a cold desert. So the Himalayas first act as a barrier for these cold winds from entering into the country. Secondly, the Himalayas also stop the monsoon winds or the rain bearing winds from crossing over the country. If it was not so, the monsoon winds which enter into the country, they would have crossed the country and moved into the areas across, and we would not have witnessed so much of rainfall. So, on both the sides, Himalayas act as a boon for the country, helping the country for the climate it is witnessing. The next factor which affects the climate of the country is pressure and wind movements. India, because of its location, witnesses various type of wind movement. In winters, winds move from the northern part towards the south, that is from land to sea. This wind movement from land to sea brings dryness into the whole country as well as the winter season into the country. Because these winds are blowing from land to sea, they do not carry any humidity with them, and they bring the season of autumn into the country. Whereas again, when we talk about the pressure and wind movements, the northeast trade winds which enter into the country in the months of December and January, they affect the climate of the country and drops the temperature. But in summer, due to the unequal heating of the water and land, a low pressure belt develops which attracts the wind from the south, and the wind which comes from south, because it is flowing over the water bodies, it brings water with it, it brings moisture with it, and as a result of it, the southwest trade winds enter into the country in the name of the monsoon winds, and they bring moisture in the whole country. So we see that the pressure and wind movement is different at different time of the years into the country. Also, when we talk about wind movement here, we should mention jet streams. Jet streams are fast flowing winds which blow in a narrow belt of high altitude in the troposphere, and the speed of these winds is around 110 kilometers per hour in summer and about 184 kilometers per hour in winter. These winds affect the climatic condition of the country in winters, because in winters an westerly jet stream enters or flows over the country, which brings some amount of precipitation into the country, and it sheds it in the northern part of the country, which is termed as Mawat in local language, that is rainfall in the winter season. In the summer season, the jet streams blow in the easterly direction, and this again affects the climate because it diverts the monsoon wind and also brings precipitation. So, when we talk about pressure and wind movement, they both affect the climate of the country. The jet streams are also responsible for sudden outbreak of the monsoon into the country.